See, I'm very critical of all of my books as a whole, especially the books I wrote when I was in middle school. I look back on those and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? But that's part of the process. No author's first book is going to be perfect, but also I have to take into account that I was 12. It's good work for a 12-year-old. It just might not be good overall.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Today's episode will leave you feeling one of two ways. I hope you leave feeling fired up about your next creative project, but there's a chance you might go away feeling like it's too late to do all the really cool things you always dreamed you would. And truth be told, I'm still on the fence about my own feelings on the subject, but I'm doing my best to lean toward fired up. My guest today is Shanti Hershenson. She began writing in 2020 in her joyful rebellion against the boredom she was experiencing during lockdown. Since then, she's published over 16 books. She continues to write at least 1,000 words every day, and I don't think I mentioned it yet, but at the time of this interview, she is 16 years old. Yeah, you heard that right. We discuss her process, how she finds inspiration, and what keeps her motivated to publish at such a quick pace. So let's jump in right now. Shanti, thank you for joining me on A Joyful Rebellion. I'm glad to have you here, and I'm excited to talk to you about your books and your writing and your process and the fact that you are very different from most every other guest that I've had on so far, and that is you are living your joyful rebellion without having to go through some sort of crisis of meaning. And what I mean by that is you're 16. Let's just get that out of the way, right? So most of the people I'm talking to, they've gotten to a point where maybe in their career, they've gotten out of school. And when I saw your bio, I saw your info, and I was like, oh man, this is someone who's doing what they love to do, and you're kind of ahead of the curve. So that's why I'm so pumped to talk to you about this. What was it when you were 12 years old that got you wanting to write books, and not just read books, not just talk about books, but actually start to put words on the page and produce stories?
Honestly, it really was just boredom. I wanted to write a book for about as long as I can remember. When I was really, really young, 5, 6 years old, I would create these little books, basically just scribbles and drawings, and then I would staple it together. But what happened was, when I was 12 years old, we all got sent home from school, and that began lockdown.
Yeah.
And during our lockdown, I had absolutely nothing to do. I mean, when you're 12 and you're stuck at home, in some ways it was a lot of fun. And honestly, I remember those days really fondly now that I look back on it. But at the time, I was absolutely miserable. I remember I would be watching TV all day. I would sit on my beanbag down in our family room, and I would just be on my phone, playing video games, watching TV. And it really wasn't that fun. I was really sad. And furthermore, I had just moved to a new city. I grew up in Los Angeles, but a couple months before we'd moved to San Diego. So I didn't know a lot of people. I really did not have much to do other than be bored. I don't remember exactly when it happened. What I remember is a couple months later, maybe, we finally got to leave the house, and my family, we went for a walk on the beach. And I don't know what it was about the beach. I really love the beach. I don't like sand, but I like the beach. And I was like just thinking of ways to not be as miserable. And one of the things I thought of was, I was like, I should write a book. It doesn't matter if I can actually do it. It just might be fun. And I sat down right when I got home, and I just started writing. I actually started out writing a screenplay, but I couldn't get it to work. Then I just was like, just do it. Just write an actual book. Just try it. You have nothing to lose. And I started writing. And that soon became Biomlock, which became extremely long. It was 250,000 words. I believe I finished it around the time I turned 13. It was 800 pages. It was way too long to
Wow.
publish. So I
Yeah.
actually split it into 3 books.
Okay.
And then while I was working on the numerous drafts, I wrote a series of novellas that were around 100 pages. That was a much easier editing process. So then Biomlock was actually my 6th book I published, but it was the first book I ever wrote. And that was really the beginning. And as I was writing that book and editing it and freaking out over the fact that my book was like way too long, I didn't know what I was doing, I did a lot of research. So by the time I actually had a book to publish, I had learned a lot about marketing and about the whole process.
That's really cool. And that's why I wanted to kind of get the backstory, because one thing I hear so often, our society is largely one now that consumes entertainment. With all the social media, there are a lot of people producing things, but there are also even more who are binging Netflix, doing all the games. It sounds like you did that until you sort of got burnt out on it and you weren't finding any fulfillment from that anymore, from just the pure consumption of entertainment, and you wanted to create something, you wanted to say something. What was it that made you choose the genre that you did? Is that just something you were interested in already?
What's really interesting is a lot of the stuff that I was watching and reading and binging was actually science fiction. So that was my main genre for a really long time. Honestly, I still write a lot of sci-fi. I've just sort of branched out now. But that first book was science fiction. And really that's just because that's been like my favorite genre for as long as I can remember. I have parents who really like science fiction, so I was exposed to it at a really young age. And a lot of the stories I wrote as a kid also had aliens and space and robots, and it took place in the future, all that fun stuff. But also at the time, and still now, I was really obsessed with Star Wars. I've liked Star Wars literally since I was in preschool. But right then during the pandemic, I don't know what it is, but I just got super interested in Star Wars again. And then that's really evident in my early writing. Even though Biomlock is quite different, there's still little things. There's like spaceships and a lot of really epic battles and stuff. And you can really see just I was really inspired by Star Wars. And that's perhaps what got me to choose science fiction as a genre.
You were 12 like 4 years ago, which if you do the math is a quarter of your life ago, right? I'm curious if you read some of the things like the novella or some of the things that you've written and you just kind of cringe based on where you are now and all of the development. You've written over a dozen books at this point, right?
Yeah.
You've got a lot of practice and a lot of reps in. How do you feel about what you wrote 4 years ago compared to now?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I'm very critical of all of my books as a whole. I tell people, like when people ask about my books, I'm like, oh, I hate that one. Or my favorite book, I tell people I tolerate it, especially the books I wrote when I was in middle school. I look back on those and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? Particularly Biomlock. I was just having a conversation with someone the other day where I was like, oh my gosh, why did I think this was so good? It's literally so bad in hindsight. Like some of my older books, okay, they're not that great, but that's part of the process. No author's first book is going to be perfect, but also I have to take into account that I was 12. It's good work for a 12-year-old. It just might not be good overall. Actually, the book that I've coming out in about a month now, and I just finished the final round of editing a couple weeks ago. That book I wrote when I was 14. There's nothing that I can tell that's seriously wrong with it. I think it's a fine book. My dad's reading it right now. He really likes it. I don't like it because I was 14 when I wrote it, and just because my writing has progressed, I can tell that I was 14 when I wrote it. I might be the only one that can tell.
Yeah, you're the only one. And is it kind of like when you hear your voice in a video sometimes you're like, oh, that's what I sound like? Is it that kind of thing when you read something that you wrote a couple of years ago or try to edit it?
Oh, yeah. Even books, honestly, that I wrote a couple months ago, I'm like, oh, I don't like this. But it's also, I write so much that my writing improves. I had a YouTube channel for a really long time. It's the similar feeling to when I look at my old videos. I do hear my really high-pitched voice, except there's a lot more content with my books than YouTube.
The whole reason I bring that up is for anyone listening right now, I just want to emphasize the fact that you are working on something right now that you wrote a few years ago, and sometimes it does make you cringe to think about that. But what you said was useful. You said Biomlock, when you wrote it when you were 12, you said it was really good for someone who was 12. And a lot of people who stay stuck in their lives, they don't really move forward. I'm guilty of this in a lot of ways. And even with writing, people will try to wait until it's just right or perfect before they put it out. And what you've done is you've put out a lot of work and you said, hey, that stuff was great for the time. It's not me anymore. I'm going to push forward. And that's huge. And that's what makes me want to dig in a little bit more to just what's going on in your thought process when you're pushing forward like that, because a lot of people wouldn't. A lot of people would stop and say, oh gosh, I'm embarrassed by Byram Luck, I'm going to go redo it, or whatever the case might be. What pushes you to be okay with the stuff that you've done before, keep it out there and just keep making good stuff?
The biggest thing is just the books that I'm currently writing and the ideas I have, because I'm the kind of person who I get tired of ideas pretty quickly, but I'd never stop writing them. I always get through it, but that means I'm so over Byram Luck now that I can't imagine going back and redoing it because I have so many better ideas. So really thinking more about the future than the past is just a great way to get through that, because I'm thinking more about the books I'm going to write than the ones that are already out and published and there's nothing I can do about it. I do think maybe in the future at some point I could potentially redo the books, but I don't know if I will, because those are books I wrote when I was 12, and if I'm like redoing it, I'm kind of undermining my 12-year-old voice. Actually, for the second Byram Luck book I published recently, and I wrote an author's note because I wrote it when I was 12. It's obvious I wrote it when I was 12, and I don't want someone who stumbles upon it to think this is me writing now. But I think it's still important to publish because it's still my voice. It's just when I was 12.
Yeah.
So another reason I think to not redo the books is just because I'm undermining the thoughts and ideas I had when I was 12, and that's something that's special, and that's something I can't necessarily create now. Because some of the things, even if it's bad, some of the stuff that happened in my books when I was 12 is insane. It's ridiculous. But that's part of the fun. And I'm not going to make those same choices now. So, like, why would I take that out of the book if it's fun to read? Doesn't mean it's good or educational to read, or it's teaching the reader complex lessons about life and about writing. But it's fun.
It was fun. And it was fun for you. And that was the whole point at the time. You were bored. You wanted something to do, and you wanted to create, it sounds like. And there are people who just have this need to create things, and you were doing that through words. I'm wondering, when you published this book and you're 12 years old, what was the reaction from your parents? It sounds like they were really behind you on that, but then from the larger audiences, maybe family you didn't see quite as often, and they're like, oh, you got a book, okay, that's cool. Then maybe taking it out there, you're in a new town, you're obviously would be in a new school, so you've got teachers. What were all the quote unquote grown-up reactions to your book at that time when you were 12?
Almost all of the reactions were incredible. My parents are really supportive, my extended family's really supportive, and they all liked the early books. Now I have so many books, I don't expect everyone to read all of them. I'm pretty sure my grandfather might be the only one who's read literally all of my books, but I won't hold anyone against, because people have their own lives and they can't read 17 books.
Yeah.
But I think literally my grandfather has every single book, and that's really special. But also just the people who have just been really there and they all congratulated me. That's all really special to me. And I would never hold it against someone for not reading my books. Yeah. I'm so overwhelmed sometimes that I don't read a lot. There were very few unsupportive adult reactions I got. I remember a couple teachers of mine weren't as supportive. My 7th grade math teacher. It's kind of funny now. So
yeah, curious about that, because I would imagine you get a couple of different reactions, but generally people are excited to see someone motivated to do something. So on that account, I would imagine people would be super supportive. But I've said this on the podcast several times. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a photographer, and that's what I ended up going to college for. That's what I ended up doing for my career. It's what I still do outside of the podcast. And I had people just ask me, well, like, how are you going to make a living doing that? Not that when you're 12 or even 16, people are going to expect you to be an author or writer for the rest of your life. It's what you're doing now. It's what you love. But adults, being short-sighted like we are sometimes, we think, oh, they're doing that, you're really into it, you've got a passion for it, so I would imagine that's what you think you're going to do forever, then try to squash that. Did anyone try to squash that?
Yeah, I've had people like over the years say things to me about it, or be like, how are you going to make money?
Yeah.
My response to that every time is I love writing. Writing's a really important skill. I think I'm going to be writing books for the rest of my life, but there's other writing related things I love to do. I just really love being creative, and I'm not very good at like art other than writing. So I think this is my creative outlet, and there are countless ways to pursue that. I'm very confident that I can make a living through this, whether it's through publishing books or ghostwriting or screenwriting or anything like that. Though I'd like to do everything. That's just what I tell people, is if I love doing it, I can find a way to make a living.
That's the great thing about writing, because it's just like with what I do in photography. There are so so many careers within photography. You could be a photojournalist. You could be the person who just photographs horses. I mean, there are people who like horse shows. That's all they do. I don't understand all the intricacies of what they do, but there are dozens and dozens of little micro niche careers within that world, just like copywriting, ghostwriting. So big opportunities there.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where you get your ideas. You mentioned Star Wars, so that's movies, TV shows, things like that. Where outside of that kind of entertainment do you go for inspiration?
It really comes from everything. I will say sometimes I have different dreams and then I'll write down something that happened in the dream and then I realize that could be a really good book. Or a couple times I've had dreams where I'm like writing a completely new book and then I'll remember the plot and be like, wait, that's actually pretty good. Sometimes it's just like the idea pops into my head or someone will say something completely random and I'll be like, that could make a good book. Or sometimes I'll just see something like someone walking down the street and I'll be like, I wonder if they might make a cool character. It just comes from everywhere. And I think I'm pretty observant of the world around me. I do spend a lot of time thinking. I get distracted really easily just because I'm like thinking all the time.
Yeah.
And that combination really makes it so I can just have all these different ideas. Some of the ideas I have, I don't even remember where they came from. I have in my notes app on my phone just this list of ideas, and I've had it since I've started publishing. So since 6th or 7th grade. And I'm not sure. I don't remember if I started it before or after Bind Block, but I think it might have been after. It's just filled with ideas. Some of them are good. Some of them are really, really, really bad. But occasionally I'll look through and I'll be able to find ideas. I don't even remember where I came up with them. I'm just, that would make a pretty good book.
Do you have several books going on at once, or do you have like a notebook of ideas and then you try to decide which one you're going to buckle down on and really take it all the way through before you go to your next idea? What's your process there?
When it comes to writing, I'm only really ever writing the first draft of one book. And I'm devoting my time to writing 1,000 words of that book every single day. But at the same time, I'm always editing a book. Once I've reached the halfway point for a book, by then I'm usually trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. So right now I have a book that I'm currently writing, and that book has been taking forever and it's way too long and I'm like worried about it, but it's a fun book. Then I have another book that I'm editing. Also, I guess at the same time, I have a book that I'm promoting because I have one that comes out next month. Then I'm also starting to plan my next book. And I have the prologue sort of outlined. I know what's going to happen. I have up to a certain point in the story, I know what's going to happen. I've written a bit of the prologue just for fun. But I'm not going to officially start that book until after I'm done with the first draft of the other one.
So how do you switch gears from writing new content, then maybe even a couple of hours later in the day, switch into editor mode for a completely different book? How do you keep your brain organized?
So I really don't edit every single day. I primarily edit on the days that I meet with my writing coach, so we can discuss the book. I have a writing coach that also is like my editor and does that proofreading round of editing, because what I find is there's always things I miss. I'm a very clean writer, so my drafts are usually readable and I can catch a good amount of errors, but there's also the little plot things I just don't realize, because to me it'll make perfect sense. To anyone else, something I write makes no sense. But those are usually the only days I edit when we meet, just because occasionally I'll have the time to edit. Sometimes though, when I'm doing that final round of editing for a book, which I'm not right now, I'll try to read the chapter every day.
At what point in your books, so you've written, what did you say, 17 now?
Yeah.
At which book did you realize that it would be really beneficial for you to have a writing coach and someone who could help you edit and just give you a different perspective about your writing? Because up until then, it sounds like you'd had, like, your grandfather had read your books, your parents, of course, had read a few, people close to you who were not necessarily in the business and were also going to say, oh, Shanti, you're the best ever. And at what point did you think, you know what, it would be helpful to get someone's perspective who knows the business and also can tell me if this is great or if this needs a lot of work?
I've been meeting with my writing coach since while I was like writing Bind Block. So really since the beginning. Oh, wow. What happened there was, I remember I was about 40,000 words into the book, I think. I was getting there. I didn't know I had 200,000 words to go.
Whoa.
I was just at a point where I was like, I'm going to need help. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I've read some articles about marketing and editing and all of that, but I'm going to need some extra help. It's not a giant thing. It's just that final read through. And then also like I asked a lot of questions about the publishing, or at least I did then. So really it was like early on. So I don't think anyone had actually read my books then.
I guess the point I want to make for anyone listening is you realized pretty early on, you had the wisdom somehow at age 12, 13, that you could really benefit from having extra input, and you got a coach who could help you through some of these things. And I would imagine once you started working with that coach, you got some perspective that helped you understand what was normal in the publishing industry, where you were in the scheme of things as far as the quality of your writing or even the ideas you had. And then tell me if I'm right or wrong, or I'm willing to be wrong. But I would think that your writing just skyrocketed after that because you had the extra confidence of knowing, well, this person who knows what they're talking about is helping me. They've got me if I go astray. And now it's just up to you to make the words happen. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, I think my confidence definitely did skyrocket. It was really funny because at the time I was super nervous. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I found out I actually wasn't really doing a lot wrong. And my writing wasn't even as bad as I thought it was. And that confidence, realizing from someone who's not my family that I'm actually doing a pretty good job, was like really helpful.
Yeah, that's huge. And when it comes to other research that you were doing outside of the coach, you talked about research. Was that looking at things on YouTube, trying to get a sense of what was right and wrong, normal or not? Where were you looking for other research about the business of writing and publishing?
I was just looking everywhere. I remember I would watch a lot of YouTube videos. I self-publish, but I was trying to figure out which platform do I self-publish through? Do I do KDP or Ingram Spark or both? And I watched so many videos of people unboxing their books and reviewing it. I researched a lot of marketing, and mainly that was just because I wanted to know what to expect. I wanted to see like all these stories of authors being successful, kind of so I could daydream.
Okay.
So I remember I read a lot on the Reedsy blog, and they have a ton of really awesome articles, by the way. So if you're someone who's looking to publish, go to the Reedsy blog. It's awesome. Okay. And I would just read a ton of articles on marketing and publishing. And I would do this mainly while I was watching TV. I have this habit, and I still do it now, where like I'll put on an episode of something or a movie and then I'll just sit on my computer and read the articles while watching. So that was honestly extremely helpful.
What does it take to derail you from your 1,000 words a day for you to just say, you know what, I can't do it today? Because as a writer, if you're going to publish as many books as you have in the amount of time that you have, which is incredible, by the way, you have to be disciplined. You have to knock out those words. You have to hit your word goal every single day. So what would it take to derail you from that?
Ooh, good question. I want to say nothing. I'm trying to remember the last time. I think I've had a streak now for over a year. I'm trying to remember the last time. I have a photo of me over the summer writing in a hospital bed. I had a concussion. That was back in November. I wrote every day still. I did my 1,000 words. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. So I want to say nothing, but I'm sure there is something.
Okay. Like a massive power outage or the pulse or something. I don't know.
Had a power outage and I did my writing in my notes app on my computer because I can do that without internet.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay. All right. Nothing's going to stop you.
I'm sure there's something.
Well, I want to take a hard left turn here and talk about a book that seems like it's a little different from the usual topics or usual stories that you're writing. And it's a book that you wrote called You Won't Know Her Name. It's a novel told in poetry that tackles the topic of bullying in middle school. And I'm curious, that one sticks out to me as being quite different from some of the others. It might not be. I haven't read all 17 books, but I would like to talk about that one in relation to, is that something you experienced personally? Is that something that you saw other people go through and wanted to give voice to that? What led up to that book?
Oh yeah, You Won't Know Her Name. I'd like to say that it's the most influential book that I've ever published in my career. Technically, it's not anymore because I think Never Dying, which is this dystopian sci-fi romance book, has done the most for me. But You Won't Know Her Name is one of the staples of my career. It's essentially a memoir, though a couple things are changed just for...
Because you have to.
Yeah, it's a novel told in poetry, like you said, and it's based on my true experience being really badly bullied when I was in 6th grade. And it talks about the school's reaction to it, also how I tried my best to overcome it using poetry. I will say the poetry isn't great, but that's also the fun of it because I was in 7th grade. And in many ways, I like the fact the poetry is not so great because it just shows how young I was when I wrote it. And I think that provides a better message than it being like extremely well written with beautiful poems. I published it not really expecting much from it. The cover that you see now on Amazon and Goodreads, the book's really beautiful cover, that wasn't even the original cover. I didn't invest any money in this book. I wrote it really, honestly, really quickly, and I edited it really quickly because it's not too long of a book because it's poems. I designed a cover on Canva, and I just threw it up on Amazon and made an Instagram post because mainly I wanted to get the story off my chest. Another important thing to note is my school administration told me that I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what happened to me, and I really felt trapped by that. And of course I told people what happened to me. I'm not going to listen.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I need to spread awareness for what happened to me. I need to talk about this because this is really serious. And my school's response is basically, oh, it's just middle school. It happens all the time. It doesn't. And this isn't just middle school. So that was kind of my way of being like, I'm going to try to make a difference. And I still threw it on Amazon being like, oh, well, maybe it's going to sell one book to someone and they'll like it. No. It did really well. Instantly.
I would imagine a lot of people, that story kind of hit a lot of people in a way that they recognized themselves in some of it.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure in a couple months, it was like my most popular book. It's not really anymore.
Yeah.
It's actually my most reviewed book, but it's not my most sold book. There are 2 books that have sold more than it. But it's a book that's done really well. It really helped my career take off. It's the book that I promoted when I first created a TikTok account.
Okay.
And I've had countless people reach out to me and be like, hey, I love this book. It really resonated with me. I really connect to the character. That was really special for me because it's a really dark book. It's really upsetting. There's a lot of stuff in there that honestly I didn't even really know how to handle when I was in 7th grade. One thing I did, and I wouldn't do this now, is I put a trigger warning in the book for all these different topics because it's a lot. And then before each poem, I would put a trigger warning for that thing. And a lot of people didn't understand that. Honestly, I don't understand it now, but it just shows like how young I was. And really, a lot of the reviews say I handled the topics pretty well. I'm not sure I did, but it's really a tribute to how young I was. And that's something that I think is really special about it.
In the catalog of your 17 books, which book was this? Was this halfway through? What number book was this for you?
So You Won't Know Her Name came out right before Biomlock. So I believe that was number 5.
Okay.
I really should know that.
The reason I'm curious about that is because if you had readers who were already used to a certain genre of your novels and then they looked at this, it sounds like you got a whole new group of readers from the memoir who came to it because of the subject matter. And I'm wondering if you were able to convert any of them to the other books that you have a blast writing with all the ideas that you have.
I definitely think You Won't Know Her Name brought me the most readers early on. And I do know a lot of them went and read my other books. A lot of my other books probably weren't their thing. But right now, I just published back in October. That was number 15. It's called Helipads in Heaven. And it's very different from You Won't Know Her Name, but it still has the themes of bullying. Okay. And I know a lot of the people that originally went and read You Won't Know Her Name went and read this one too and really enjoyed it. But also, I know there's people who liked You Won't Know Her Name and then read Never Dying and vice versa. Because Never Dying is the other really big book in my career that really did a lot for me. That book I published a couple days after I graduated 8th grade. Okay. And that is my most sold book. It's not my most reviewed book. It's my most sold book.
Wow, that's really cool. And that leads me to wonder, when you are in school now, in the grade you are, at the age you are, you've got 15 books under your belt. They're on Amazon. They're selling. What's the reaction from your peers? Like people who either kind of know you, or what's the things you hear like third hand in school now, or just even from a wider circle who either look up to what you're doing or are a little bit jealous? What's the reaction amongst other people in your age group?
A lot of people are really surprised when they find this out. One thing about me is I'm a really shy person, so I don't talk about it a lot. When people ask like what I do for fun, I'm like, oh yeah, I like writing. Sometimes people ask for my Instagram, and I have 2 different Instagram accounts. I have my big writing Instagram, and then I have just my private account. And I usually give people the private account, but then my public account is tagged in it, and then people find it and they're like, oh my gosh, you write? But also, of course, people are going to find it out. For example, my school has this magazine, and I was like just interviewed in the magazine. So now a bunch of people are finding out. Or they have a newsletter, and back in December when I was doing a book signing, it was sent out in like the newsletter. So people gradually find out. But honestly, the reactions are overall really positive. A lot of time people will come up to me like, so how are your books doing? Or how's the book you're writing going? And I find that really fun.
Yeah.
because it's really sweet. I'm at a new school this year, but at my old school, a lot of people would refer to me behind my back as, oh my gosh, she's the nerd. I think that's really funny. I totally agree. I am a giant nerd. I literally have a Star Wars collection in my room.
It sounds like when someone asks you, you sort of downplay, I like to write, then they're thinking, oh, that's cute. She's got a journal or something like that. Then they find out and they're like, oh my gosh, she doesn't just write, she publishes. That's different. So I was curious what people's reactions, because that is such a time in life where you do want to be expressive and you do want to create, you do want to tell the world what you're all about. And some people just feel like they can't do it, so they get bitter over the people who are out there doing it. What are your biggest fears when you go to launch a book? Do you have any, or are you just ready to get it out of your system and you don't care what people think? What goes through your mind when you're about to hit publish?
I definitely have a lot of anxiety really early on with the book release. I'm a very anxious person in general, but I'm always nervous. Oh, what are people going to think about this book? I'm really scared for reviews. Thankfully, I have an ARC program. I always have advanced readers who get the copies of the book early and they read it and review it. So that gives me an idea early on about how my readership is going to like the book. And honestly, it's overwhelmingly positive. I love my ARC readers. They do an amazing job reading their book. And like occasionally they'll let me know, oh, hey, there's like a formatting error here. I sent the book that I have coming out in April to 100 ARC readers. It was a very complicated book to format. And when I rendered that final PDF, a couple of the pages got cut off. And thankfully they let me know. They were super nice about it. And I just resent the files and it was all good. But I'm always nervous because a group of readers who already like my work and they're going to enjoy it is very different than the general public.
Yeah.
But also, I guess another thing that helps with that is editorial reviews. For example, with Helipads in Heaven, I submitted for 5 editorial reviews from Reader's Favorite, which is just they review books. They also have a book award program, which is cool. And I've never won that, but I really hope I do someday. And I submitted for 5 reviews and all of them came back as 5 stars. And I was going to cry. I was so happy. And that all happened before the book came out. So then when that book came out, and actually came out on my birthday, I was like, okay, this is going to be fine.
Well done.
Thank you.
I'm hearing you talk and it feels like everything you do feels like 2 full-time jobs. I'm just here to say it. And so hats off to you for keeping it up. No one's making you do this. This isn't your homework you get assigned. This is what you do after or before homework. This is the real question I have. You go to school. You have a full day at school. When are you doing your writing? The reason I ask this is because a lot of people who are listening to this, they are people who have full-time jobs. They got the family, they got the dinner to make when they get home. They're thinking, oh gosh, I would love to write a book too. I have these stories that are in me and I would love them to come out. I don't have time. I don't think you do either. So when do you make the time to do everything you do?
I always tend to find some moments during the day. For example, say I have class. Usually when we take a test during school, we don't have much work to do afterwards. So I'll get a little bit of writing done then. Or my school has this thing called purpose period where we're allowed to like get work done. It's kind of like study hall. Because I know I can probably get my homework done, I try to do a little bit of writing there. And really all I do is it's 1,000 words every single day. To write 1,000 words, it can take anywhere from like 20 minutes to an hour. And I factor that into my homework. For example, maybe I'll do 30 minutes of writing and then 30 minutes of schoolwork, and typically 2 blocks of 30 minutes of writing, and I'm doing pretty well. One thing that I've started doing is I make to-do lists. I'll say, write 1,000 words, post a TikTok, do this marketing thing, do this math assignment. Then I'll just sit down, I'll listen to some music, and I'll get a lot done. So I write a lot during school. I also write after school. And one thing that I found has really helped me is to go and write somewhere that's not my house. Because writing at home, for example, like in an environment you're like extra comfortable in, can be distracting.
It's the worst.
For example, I have the world's most distracting room. I have stuff everywhere. I have 3 cats. I love them, but they are very distracting. So I end up writing a lot at different coffee shops and places like that, and like little cafes. And that really helps. From there, I just try to get everything done. And I still find that I have a really good amount of free time. But sometimes I am like really overwhelmed.
Everything you described with the advanced readers and with all of the marketing stuff and flipping the switch from producing the words to editing the last book that you wrote, I mean, it's just blowing my mind and it's making me feel really lazy, but I'm going to choose, instead of being bitter and feeling bad about myself, I'm going to let that motivate me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's going to motivate me. But what you just said about going someplace different, is so true because I'm working on kind of revising a manuscript. I'm hoping to get this put to bed middle of next month, and I'm just down in the weeds, and I was sitting down to start working on it page by page, and I said, you know what? I need to be somewhere else. So I drove myself 2 hours to the beach. I sat down in a sunny spot and I just went through it page by page, just in a different place. I overheard people living their lives, having conversations. I was like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. It was a little bit more distracting than it would have been in my house, but that's not true, because if I was in my house, I would have watered my plants. I would have cleaned a dish. I would have made some food. I would have done other things except for writing on those pages. So thank you for pointing that out, because I've found it to be true. I don't know that everybody would, but definitely works for me too.
Yeah, it really definitely depends on who you are and what works for you. Some people, it's the exact opposite. I know people who they don't like writing out in coffee shops because they're playing music and they don't like the music, which honestly, I don't either.
That kind of distracts me too. I usually have to have someplace with white noise, not music, not manufactured or piped in. It needs to be somewhere that's a little open air and has distractions so I can look away. But yes, people who really have a routine and a comfort place, that could be a problem for sure. If someone wants to get a sense of your books, if they want to go in, read previews, or just learn a little bit more about you, your process, and all things related to your books, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So I would recommend checking out my website. It's shantihershenson.com. That's ShantiHershenson.com. You can also find me on Instagram, which is just at Shanti Hershenson, and TikTok, which is at Shanti Who Writes. Honestly, though, if you look me up, I finally got my whole Google knowledge panel up, and it looks really cool, in my opinion. And you can find all of my books. They're basically available now everywhere you buy books online, but you can also find them in some bookstores and libraries. And for those trying to get into my work, I would recommend starting out with Helipads in Heaven. That's the book I published back in October. I think it's the best book I've ever written. It's my favorite. It's also a lot shorter than my other books, so it's a really good way to get a taste of my work without reading a 400-page novel.
Okay, definitely have to check that out. And I know you talked about being self-published. Are you thinking about at any point in the future, do you have an agent? Do you have a publisher? Are you looking to do any of that? Or are you just going to handle it all yourself and keep all the quality control right there with you?
I haven't tried yet. I mean, I submitted a query letter once when I was 12, but I don't think that counts. But definitely in the future, I think it's something I'm interested in. It depends on whether or not they can offer me something that I can't get on my own, because I think there are so many benefits to being traditionally published, and it's very different, and there's pros and cons to both. So I think it's definitely something that I'm interested in the future, and I currently have some books in my backlog that I think I would potentially query once I'm done with them.
That's really cool. Well, Shanti, I've got to say, this has been a great conversation. I'm so impressed in what you've done and your motivation. And I don't know, you must be an old soul, because it seems like you've got a lot inside of you that you've been able to bring out over the last 4 years, which is amazing. So I just want to call you out for that and say good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.